Hi, and welcome. I am going to give you an online talk today on how to make your drawings look more three-dimensional. So, my name is Rebecca Woods. Let me see if I can write that down. Let's see. And today I'm going to be working on a digital tablet only because that kind of capture is going to be the easiest thing for making a video for you guys to follow. So I am an adjunct professor over at Colorado Mesa University, and I teach drawing as my main mode of instruction over there. So I've been teaching college students for several years now about how to improve their work and how to achieve the results that they really want to get from their drawings. So first things first, we need to establish what it is that we're trying to do when we talk about making our drawings more 3D. Okay? So rather than just have something that looks flat, it looks like you just cut it out of a piece of paper, we want to make something that has a little bit more of an illusion of three-dimensionality to it. And you may not be thinking about it as 3D drawing, but essentially what you're trying to do, if you want to make a work in 3D, is that you want to create the illusion of space. And the illusion of space can be with the aim of making something look a little bit more what we call representational, to make it look like something in the real world, or just to give it a sense of mass and to give it a sense of depth and dimension. That's oftentimes the sense of realism that people are seeking in their drawings. So this isn't to say that completely flat or what we call decorative arts don't have their value. There's plenty of quilters who would, they'd do some terrible things to me if they heard me say something like that. But when you want to make an illusion, there's a certain way that you gotta go about it. So, first things first, we gotta establish what we're working with. So, oftentimes, if you look at a picture, and you have a picture that's hanging on the wall, okay, and let's have some fun here. We've all been in the house a little bit too long. Let's go ahead and give this picture a bit of a frame. Now, this is a pretty simple frame. You know, we don't have to be too fancy around here. And when you look at this picture, you may be used to thinking that this surface right here, is the picture. But what you're looking at is not just a picture. What you're looking at is the picture plane. So before I get ahead of myself too much, this is a dot, okay? And if you remember back to 6th grade, or if you are in 6th grade, if we take two dots and we draw the space between them, we get a line. It's very exciting. Now, lines are basically one-dimensional. There's not a whole lot we can do with them. So if we take a couple of lines and we enclose them, we get a plane. So, planes can have all kinds of shapes, and shapes can have all kinds of planes. And this right here is essentially a flat surface. think of like a piece of paper that you have laying flat on the table. Okay? That surface right there, the plane, is what we are concerned with. So when we say something is the picture plane, what we're saying is that this, I'm gonna make me a Mona Lisa here. Okay? The picture plane is that frontal surface that you're looking at. But if we say something that is just treating the surface, okay? Imagine like you have some designs on a piece of paper, and it's just some flat repeating designs. They're attractive, you know. You can make something beautiful out of them, and it's a lot of fun, and we all have a good time. But if you want to create that sense of depth, you need to start thinking about it differently. So, let's say that thing that we took right there. We're going to shift it around a little bit, and we're just going to do some easy tricks that help us begin to view that as a three-dimensional space instead of just a flat space. First things first, we have to start understanding the picture plane as more than just a flat surface. Let's go ahead and put my frame back out here. I want you to start thinking of that picture plane like a theater or a movie screen, and you can't actually step inside, but you know that there's something in there. So we're going to take these lines and we're going to take them back. And now we've just made a second plane. This is the picture plane. Let me label it. And this is the ground plane. And the neat thing about the ground plane is you can think of it like the floor that everything's sitting on in this space. And the great thing is, we then start to create a space behind the picture frame. So, the thing about grounds is that you can have more than one of them. I'm sure you are familiar with the term background. Background is very commonly understood. Now, if I make some little imaginary slides here, like little pieces of theater scenery, this is our background. This is our middle ground, or midground. And this, they both are, is our foreground. Now, a lot of playing with space comes down to understanding this very simple principle that space has layers. And there's a really, really easy way to play with it. So let's say I make a circle. Okay? And you can remember this as the first trick for space and dimension. Let me write that down. If I do an example over here, if I make these simply sitting there, just kind of in space, the space itself becomes ambiguous. We can't really tell if one's in front of the other. But if I put one in front of the other, you immediately start to see the illusion of space there, especially when I indicate something like a horizon line. So the first trick is overlapping. Overlapping is the very first thing you can do to create a sense of space. Now, Rebecca, you might be saying, I didn't sit here to watch this because I wanted to hear all about overlapping and how to make paper theaters. I thought you said that this was going to be about form. And I promise you it is. I just have to establish what a plane is first. So let's say that I draw something like this. This is a square, or it's roughly squarish. Squares are a single plane. They only have 2 dimensions. Now, on the other hand, let's say I take something like this, and I add a couple more planes onto it. I'll get that shape a little bit more right. You'll notice that as I'm sketching, I don't really care about sitting down and trying to fix every single one of the errors that I make. When I sketch, I try to get the idea out first, and then I can refine it. It's just like carpentry. You have to make sure that you can cut the rough shape first, and after that, once you've refined the shape, you can start to actually polish it. So if I take this, which is 6 squares, okay, and I start to fold them up, this is also a really fun craft if you just need something to do in a day when you're stuck at home. You can make boxes, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to make some boxes. We're going to fold up those sides, just like so. You can imagine them folding together, and they're going to create a cube. And the great thing about a cube is that unlike a square, a cube has 6 planes. And a cube, unlike a square, exists in 3D. So things that are 3D have more than one plane than things that are 2D. That becomes useful. Now we can do that again. We can take something like a rectangle. Now this rectangle could be turned into another box, or I could take a big long piece and 2 circles. Now these aren't in proportion. I would need that piece to be a lot longer, so let's go ahead and fix that while we're here. Yeah, let's get it more of the length it needs to be. Okay? So if I were to take one of those circles and put it on the top, one of those circles and put it on the bottom, and wrap that whole piece around like it was a Pringles can. And let's say that they join right here, and I can put some tape on it, and now I have a tube. I also have what we call a cylinder. And cylinders are also 3D. You can make forms, as we call them, out of shapes. And forms are one of the secrets of three-dimensional art. So you can even do it with something like a circle. Okay? So we can just take a circle. And we could say, that's a sphere. But how do we tell that it's a sphere? Okay? I want you to imagine taking a circle, and we're going to turn it on its side a little bit, just like so. And then we're going to do another one, and they're going to intersect like this. And then we're going to connect those sides. Going to fill in all that space. Woohoo! Now we have a sphere. We have kind of a wireframe sphere. Now, this that I did just right here, this is what's called an ellipse. And an ellipse is what happens when circles are moved in three-dimensional space. Okay? So, if I have... Didn't start that quite straight. If I have something like this, there's a rule when it comes to space. And it's the fact that everything gets smaller as it gets further back. We call this linear perspective. And we think we kind of know it, but we don't even really process that we're doing it when we look at things. So, I'm going to lay that square down in space. Now it looks like it's sitting flat on something. And we're going to cross that, and we're going to cross this, and I can map a circle inside that square. Now if I do the same thing here, and I look where that is, and I look where this needs to be, if I map it the same way, I will get my ellipse. Something that's really helpful with ellipses is that they don't have corners. They don't come together like this, because that is an eyeball. Okay? We're not making eyeballs. Ding, 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 ding. Alright, we're not making eyeballs. You're making a circle that exists in space. We're making a plate. And you can even draw a line, and you can make a stack of plates. Okay? You can even play an easy game. Okay? If you look at this, this almost looks like a spiral or a slinky. So, we can play a game where we make those slinky coils, and as we come around the corner, we make them bigger, because that means they're coming towards us in space. Okay, and so if I take the top line of that and the bottom line, okay, now we start to have something that looks like it's moving in space. Now let me just clean that up a little bit, make it a little bit cleaner. Clear out the inside. Just gonna switch to my eraser. Okay, these kinds of coils are really useful. So this could be like a pipe. And let's say that we also want to portray what it looks like on the inside. Well, first off, I'm going to give it a lip. And then I'm going to have it continue to follow the lines of that curve, and I'm going to make it get darker as it goes back because we can no longer see it. Okay? And around the outside here, I'm just going to put some lines, and those lines are also going to move. And we've started to do what is called shading. We can start to indicate the light and the shadow. So, okay. So, before I get too far ahead of myself, we've got our picture plane here. And I'm going to draw a line right across the center. Now this is what we call the horizon line. And the horizon line is where the sky meets the ground. So if things get smaller when they go back in space, if they keep getting smaller, eventually they're going to meet. So let's put just a little dot right there. And then we're going to bring some lines out from that dot. And now we have a long and lonely highway in Kansas because it's very flat. Now what I just did there, if I draw my little theater again, if we draw this out, that highway continues the same and doesn't get any smaller going back. But because the background is further away, we have just followed along that ground plane to where the background would be. We'll say the background is up. So this is where the background would be, okay? And we're looking at that box. And we can do the same thing. So let's take a line that comes up this way. And one thing that happens too is that things also appear to be closer together as they disappear into the distance. That's another way that we can create a sense of space. And so we can do an infinite line of power lines going into the distance. Now these power lines are pretty close together, and I think anybody who works with power lines would tell you that's a bit too close together. So let's say I've got some straight lines here. I want to take that line back. Let's make that one a little higher. And we're going to take the top of that and also go back. Now, we're just going to take a straight line off here. And inside that box that I just drew, what if I want to draw something like an old truck? Now, I recommend if you're drawing something like a truck, unless you've drawn 10,000 trucks, you should find some reference for a truck. Find some pictures. Work from them. But I don't recommend looking at other people's drawn artwork. That can be good as a place to get started, but you do a lot better and you learn a lot more if you work from photos instead. Okay? So what I just did here is that I blocked out the linear perspective in this picture. Things disappearing into the distance back there. Let's trim your truck up a little bit. Okay? And clean those lines up. We don't have to work super clean to begin with. We can just get the ideas down. So this is an example of what I call, or what is generally called, one-point perspective, because everything is disappearing into the distance at one point. Now, the thing is, the image changes. Oh, that is super messy. The image changes depending on what your eye level is. So if you're higher up, it'll be like you're in an airplane and you're looking down on it. And so we're just going to draw that little truck right here as well. Taking those lines so that they meet at the perspective. Meet at the vanishing point. Just working quickly and blocking stuff out. Okay? And the perspective of that is very different from the perspective of that. And at the same time, if you want to make something look like it's really low down, you do the opposite. You drop the horizon line. Now we actually can't see the vanishing point, but we're going to exaggerate those. And we've got like a tire here, and we got the tailgate. We're still going to put the vanishing point right there, but our perspective is going to be different. Take that out. It's a little too close to the edge. Okay, so we go ahead and alter it based upon the angle you're seeing it from. So now we have 3 views of the same picture, all because we changed the eye level. So eye level refers to where the horizon line is going to be. Now, if I was standing right here, okay, I'm just gonna draw a giant person, I think. Yeah, this is a bit too big. I think I would have to be standing outside of the picture, and my eye level would be about there. I would have to be about this far away, and this would continue on, and it would hit about my waist. Whereas I already mentioned, you can imagine you got your little drone flying above. Okay, that's about the eye level you're at there. That's like a drone eye level. Whereas this is like a standing eye level. And this could be like a little tiny ant. Or somebody sitting very low. Got your arms spread out. Why are you lying in the road, buddy? You better move. Okay? So that's some very basic one-point perspective to get you started. But things are more interesting if we give ourselves more room to play. So instead of just having 1 point, what if we play with 2? If we play with 2, suddenly we can start drawing those lines all the way back to those points. Move that along here. Usually when I'm working with perspective, I don't like to use a ruler. And part of the reason why is that I just want to get it out, get it on paper or on screen, as the case may be here, make my adjustments later. And I find if I sketch freehand like this, it feels more comfortable in the long run to go ahead and do the same thing. And, you know, it's different for everybody. If you find yourself more comfortable doing this with a ruler, then do it with a ruler. I'm not here to make rules. Okay? So now we have a glass box. Let's put a goldfish in it. Remember, don't keep goldfish in bowls. They're living animals and they need room to swim and breathe. That's been your public service announcement from a person who's kept fish for a long time. And if you do keep them in a bowl, make sure that you at least get a good filter for it. So, we now have a fish tank. But this is an example of 2-point perspective because we've got 2 points that everything goes to. And following those same rules, if I put another line right here, I can also take it up to here and draw another one. And this is going to look really messy up until you start to clean it up. Like I said, it's a little bit like carpentry. Now the top line of it basically seems to disappear because it's right along the horizon line. If that happens to you, don't worry, you can always fix it, or you can resolve to live with it. Both are good options. So that's trick 2. Perspective. Now, perspective and overlapping both take advantage of the idea that what you're looking at is actually a 3-dimensional space. So it's thinking about it in 3D instead of just thinking about it as a flat plane. And there's a lot that you can do with that. A fun classic exercise is to take a nice old squiggle like this and to start turning that squiggle into a cliff or a big bridge. We can add a little bit of shading. And that is another point. Once you start bringing the idea of light and shadow into it, and where shadows fall, your work is going to start looking a lot more 3-dimensional. And that is a really important part of making things look 3D, is knowing where to put your shadows. With this, I can say the light source is coming directly from above because it's only the sides that are lit up. Well, it's only the sides that are in shadow and the top is all lit up. Okay? But if I were to change where the light's coming from, I'll go ahead and take this out. Okay, so if I go ahead and change where the light's coming from, and let's say, for example, that there's a strong light source coming from this direction, light. Okay, this is not necessarily going to be empty. And this may look a little bit more shadowy there. But this, in direct opposition, that is going to look a lot darker. That is going to give it more of a sense of dimension. So, If we have something like our basic circle and we're going to turn it into a sphere, how do we do that? How do we start to think about this thing having 3 dimensions instead of just 2? Well, you'll notice that I just drew this curve around the object. That curve is a really important part of what makes that object look 3-dimensional, because it's curving around the surface of the object. And if I look at that and I pay attention to it, I can make my lines also curve around it in a way. If the light source is coming from here, I can make that work in a way that makes it look 3D. Another thing you can do, and this is really helpful, is if you give your objects cast shadows that are directly in opposition to where the light source is from, and you have all of those shadows fall on the same ground plane, so not coming up, not going down, looking like they're all part of the same space, then you can start to have something that starts to look just a little bit 3D. Now, what I challenge people to do when they do this is, once you start to understand how to make things overlap, how a horizon line works, and how to make objects that work in terms of the horizon, then you can start to play around with it in a way that you wouldn't have gotten to play around with it before. So, let's say that we want to make these into toys. Well, it's like a beach ball. We think about those lines curving around, and some of them are colored and some of them aren't. And either way, we're going to add some shading on the object itself. And the light source isn't very strong, but it's gonna basically follow the shape of those objects. Let's say that this one's more like a tennis ball. And it's a little bit fuzzy. Okay, and this one is like a block. The front side is easy because it's flat. But how are we going to map another letter in 3D? Well, we're going to do the same thing we did before and follow those lines of perspective. It's just like drawing the circle in that form. Let's say that this is a C. Any writing that's on an object is also going to obey that same property of perspective. Lines on the side of an object will also move in space. Now you may be like, that's all well and good, but what if I don't just want to draw vases or blocks or balls? How do I take that into something more complicated? And the way you do that is you take shapes and you put them together. Okay? So we have a circle, and we're going to draw sort of a wedge on that circle. It doesn't have to be a wedge. You can start with all kinds of shapes. Okay? You can start with a circle here. And you can give it the really classic pointy chin that a lot of kids do when they're learning how to draw anime for the first time. Okay? You can do a little tiny head. Beef square jaw. Either way, you're going to have these combinations of forms. Now, just like we had with the sphere, think about the way that curves around the object. And you may have seen these in how to draw books before. So I'm gonna do some lips, eyes. This is a robot man. Let's give him some robot ears. Beep boop. Okay. Give some big ol' eyes. No, little nose. So, the reason we do this, the reason you do that cross thing, is because it's helping you map out that object in space. So then, we have that form right there that we just drew with Mr. Beep Boop the robot. And if we turn it up, we're still keeping track of where those lines are. Okay, so we've got the same beep boop thing. It's so that we can keep track of it as it moves in space. Try it yourself. It's fun and exciting. Just give this guy a real big nose. And it's fun to build faces like this. It's fun to just play around. Okay, do the same thing here. Let's say we want to have that character looking down. Part of the fun of drawing is figuring out how to picture what you're drawing in 3 dimensions. And part of that comes from studying the way that things work in 3 dimensions. And some of it comes from practice and experience. And some of it also just comes from playing around. I encourage playing around. I think it's really, really important. So, let's go ahead and try and combine the things that we've learned to make some imaginary thing. We're just going to start with a cylinder, just because I feel like it. And we're going to make some compound shapes. I'm going to put an egg on top of that thing. And we're going to give it some fins, because this is turning into a rocket ship. We've got a little cone down here. Yeah! And we're going to make another little point coming up here. And I think this thing needs a window. And this brings me to my next point, is that if you make different layers, going back to the overlapping thing, if you make things that go in and out, that will also help create a sense of space. Now, I want to take that shape with the cylinder and combine it with the rocket. Combine it with the egg, and we will start to put together our rocket ship. Now, this guy is ready to go. Not going anywhere yet, though. He's still stuck. Is he stuck in space? Or is he stuck on the ground. He's stuck on the ground. But on the other hand, if I put some big old blasting rocket energy here, and I have the Earth far below to give it some context, now he's not on the ground. This astronaut has gone up and away onto new adventures. So a really good way to practice this is, yes, to draw cubes, and yes, to draw all kinds of geometric shapes. But it's also really helpful just to play around with some organic shapes too. So my challenge, you can go ahead and try it. Just make some shapes like this. And you can make them overlapping if you want. I'm going to make them overlap a little bit because overlapping helps us create a sense of space. And if we have to erase, then we have to erase. Erasing is fine. But I advocate not erasing until you've figured out the way to fix the problem. If you erase it before you fix what's wrong, like I just did here, sometimes it's difficult to figure out how to fix it. And we don't want to make things difficult. We want to live an easy life. Things are already hard. We're already having a hard time. Let's just make it easy for ourselves. So, erase once you've figured out what the problem is and how to fix it. Now, these do already have a little bit of a sense of space because I've made them overlap. But I want you to pretend like you're wrapping rubber bands around them. Just go ahead and wrap some rubber bands around these. And that, let's give that thing a lump. As long as it curves when you get out to the edges, that's what matters. And we're going to do the same thing going this way. And the same thing going this way. We're just going to put one down through the middle there, just to see. Okay? So that thing now looks like it's coming towards us in space. Whereas if I go the opposite direction with this, it looks like it's going away from us. And this is just something that you can play with. You can play with making these organic forms, these natural wobbly blobs. You can play with making them look three-dimensional and like they're coming towards you and they're going away from you. Let's go ahead and bring one of those up there too. Yeah. So that, let's make it go away from us. But this is going to come towards us. And on the end, I'm even going to make a little circle right there. So it's a fun thing to play. It's a good thing, you know, when you're on the telephone and you're waiting to get a hold of whoever it is just put you on hold. This is a fun game to play. You can just make three-dimensional shapes. Just making shapes. Making shapes. Making shapes. And if you start to fill in cast shadows, well, some of these are floating and some of them aren't. And we can start to make a space. So those are the three-dimensional shapes. And what I would encourage you to do, this is helpful when you're trying to draw something from life. Say that you want to draw a vase and you start to figure out what the shapes are and how to put them together. And you know, we've got flowers coming up here, and flowers have an organic shape. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to wrap them around. That's one thing you can do. But the other thing you can do is you can start to just make your own little place. You can start to Bob Ross it up and play with those shapes and forms. Make this a little beach hut with a little thatched roof. And we're just roughing out an idea right now. It doesn't have to be perfect. If we sketch, we can get an idea out and we can finish it in our own time. So let's make a door. Door's going to follow along the same planes. And we're going to cut into the house. And now we've got a space in the house. And let's give it a window. Yeah, we got a window. Now, we can start to build from that. So, the last thing that I will end with is that if you've ever watched Bob Ross, you will know there is a certain kind of formula to what he does. Typically, he'll make clouds first. He'll make clouds in the background. And then, depending on what kind of thing he's doing, he'll go and make some mountains. Bob Ross lived in Alaska for a long time, so the mountains are very near and dear to him. I'm sure anybody who's lived in Colorado for a long time can empathize with that. So he now has, if I draw my little theater again, he has layers of scenery that he's building towards. Clouds are here. Mountains are a little bit further closer. They're about right there instead of the back. And then typically he will put some kind of thing that skews your ability to see the actual joining point between the mountains and the ground. Typically a forest, typically a very loosely done forest. And that will exist right here. And sometimes he'll put in a lake. Lake is very Bob Ross. So the lake exists on the ground plane right there. And sometimes he'll put something right in the foreground. And this is where we start to get to happy little trees. We start to make different layers. So we've got a tree right here. We've got a tree right here. We start inhabiting that space. That imaginary space that he's created or that you've created using things on different planes. We can put something right here in the foreground. We can have big old trees. Just to help push that sense of perspective even more. But you'll notice one thing that Bob Ross doesn't do very often is that he doesn't sit down and draw a strict grid about what it is that he's trying to do. He doesn't sit there with a ruler and try to get the mathematics of it right before he ever gets the shape of other things right. Often we'll include a little cabin, and of the little cabins, he will often include some kind of fence posts, and he likes to bring reflections of the shore into the water. So if you can understand how to piece that apart and how to put everything on your own layers of scenery in your own picture, sometimes working from back to front, sometimes working from front to back, you'll start to create something that has much more of a sense of depth. And if you understand the idea of using shadow to create depth, of using overlapping to create a sense of depth, keeping things unified by keeping them on the same plane, and how to take an organic form that isn't necessarily regular or geometric and still make that three-dimensional. That is how you can start to introduce form and three-dimensionality into your artwork and take it from being just a triangle, a circle, and a blob. Okay? So, thank you so much for bearing with me. And if you make anything from this, if you come to some kind of a great revelation and you're just really proud of the work that you've done, don't be afraid to show it to people. Artwork is meant to be seen, and you're allowed to be proud of your efforts. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for honoring me with your time. And I wish you the best. I hope you have a wonderful, creative summer.